Every next era begins with a moment of honesty, and maybe this is yours. Welcome to the next era. I'm Faizah Baldonado, live design strategist and growth mentor, and this is where we slow things down enough to think clearly about who you are right now, what season you're in, and what actually fits. If you're ready to build from clarity instead of pressure, you're in the right place. Recently, I shared a childhood photo on Instagram, and it was taken when I was in kindergarten in kindy. And what I wrote on the image said, I started as a little girl trying to belong, so I learned to look around before I stepped forward. And a lot of people resonated with that. But the funny thing is, if you look closely at that photo, I'm not confidently performing at all. I'm actually completely lost. We were doing some kind of choreography on a basketball court as a class, as a group, and I had totally forgotten the moves. So I'm standing there trying to look around and copy what the other kids were doing, and I was not doing well. It was very unsuccessful. And typically, my dad happened to take that photo right in that moment when I was feeling so embarrassed, so overwhelmed, really stressed actually. And I just wanted the whole thing to be over so I could go home. But when I look at that photo now, it captures something very real about how I learned, how I moved through the world, even from a young age. Before stepping forward, I would just literally look around. I would observe. I would be trying to understand what was happening around me. And I didn't know it then, but that habit of looking around before stepping forward would follow me into almost every part of my life. And there's another part of my childhood that probably shaped this even more. When I was 7 years old, my family moved from the Philippines to Australia, and then suddenly everything was different country, different weather, different schools. And back home, we had a huge community of family, cousins everywhere, friends, and people constantly around. And then we arrived in Australia and it felt much quieter. It actually felt quite isolated, more private, more spread out. And even the games that the kids were playing were really different. And I remember learning how to play elastics and thinking how strange everything felt. It was surreal to me. Even certain words sounded funny to me. I remember thinking how funny the word galloping sounded. That actually got me into this ridiculous giggling fit. But everything was new, and even though I already understood English, Filipino was the language I spoke most comfortably. But with about 2 months, I was speaking English completely, even at home. I could still understand my parents speaking Filipino, but my brain had just adapted somehow. And looking back, that experience probably shaped something in me very early. You know, when you're 7 years old and you're suddenly in a new country, a new school, and you are the only Asian kid in the classroom, in the school, aside from my sister, you learn to observe quickly. You watch people, you observe, you learn very carefully how things work, and you learn how to adapt. And at the time, it just felt like life. But that ability to read environments stayed with me. And as I grew older, I noticed that I could move between groups of different people quite easily. I could sit with the popular kids, sit with the quieter kids, and I could sit with the ones that people called nerdy. And I genuinely liked people from all those groups. But I also noticed something interesting growing up, that some of the people who seemed the most confident or popular weren't always the nicest. They weren't very kind. And that never really sat well with me. So I often gravitated toward people who were a bit more overlooked, the quieter ones, the underdogs, and I was super curious about people's real stories. At the same time, people seemed to trust me easily because I wasn't competitive at all. I wasn't threatening, and I was really approachable. I was a nice girl, and I knew where to stay, which was somewhere in the middle. And I think that helped people feel comfortable around me. And I also found myself becoming the peacekeeper. I remember getting like little awards in school for being kind, for being helpful, for being peaceful. I was proud of that, and that role followed me into adulthood as well. And that same adaptability showed up strongly in my career, in leadership roles, in business, in projects. I became someone who could step into almost any situation and just figure it out. Give me a problem, I'll find a solution. Give me a team and I'll support them. Give me stakeholders and I will work out how to keep everyone aligned. And I adapted really quickly. And that ability helped me grow professionally. But underneath that capability was something that I didn't fully see at the time. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was okay. My team, my boss, the organization, clients, stakeholders, everyone. And that's honestly a very high bar to carry. And this really started catching up with me in my late 20s and throughout my 30s. I was capable, I could solve problems, but I was managing too many emotional environments all at once. And that takes a lot of energy because when you're the person who reads the room, supports everyone, smooths tension, and keeps things moving, you're constantly regulating more than just your own experience. I was doing it all the time, and eventually that becomes exhausting, so exhausting. And there's another place as well where I realized that this pattern was showing up, and it was showing up in my personal life. And in my early 20s, I met the person who would eventually become my husband, the love of my life. But at that time in my life, I just didn't feel ready. I didn't feel like I knew myself well enough, and I didn't feel good enough. So I did what I had done many times before. You could say self-sabotage, but quietly I stepped back. I observed, and in many ways, obvious ways, I literally ran away. And it wasn't that I didn't care. It was because I believed that I needed to go and find myself first. So our paths separated. And we didn't reconnect again until my mid-30s. It's a long journey. And when we finally found our way back to each other, it was one of those moments where it felt like no time had passed, and yet everything had changed. I had changed a lot, and the years in between had taught me so much about self-worth, confidence, and understanding who I was. And in many ways, those experiences are what allowed us to reconnect in a much stronger and healthier way. I don't regret the path, but I do acknowledge the sadness on the journey and the joy as well of finding our way back. I can see now that my habit of observing, waiting, and not feeling ready cost me time, not just in my relationships, but in opportunities as well. There were so many moments where other people could see I was ready, but I just didn't believe it yet. I thought there was always more to learn first. And learning is important, growth is important, but something else is important too. And that is the courage to say yes when you feel uncertain. The courage to step forward before you feel completely ready. Self-trust. Yes, self-trust. And sometimes the hardest part of self-trust is being honest about your hesitation. Because there were times where people around me were hurt or confused when I stepped back. Again, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to explain what was happening inside me at the time. All I knew was that I wasn't ready. And in many ways, learning to trust myself became the next chapter of belonging. I'm also very aware that the person I am today is supported by the people around me. My hubby sees how I operate very clearly. He notices my energy. He watches how much I give, and in many ways, he's like a guardrail for me. We share the same values, but we operate very differently, and that balance has been incredibly grounding. He knows how to take care of me in ways that allows me to keep doing the work that I care about without losing myself in it. And I am deeply grateful for that. You know, when I look back at my younger version, the little me who was always making sure everyone was okay, I don't feel any regret. I just feel love, I feel compassion, and I feel this deep gratitude because that version of me was learning. She was testing. She was experiencing life in real time. And over the years, I've come to see those experiences really differently. And I think of them now as data, live data. I consider life experience, emotions, and what my body tells me as really, really important information. Information about how I move through the world, information about what works for me, information about what doesn't. And honestly, I wouldn't be who I am today without collecting all of that along the way. Some people learn through books, some people learn through theory. I've always been someone who learns through experience. Sometimes that meant touching the hot plate. You can ask my mom and dad about that. Sometimes it meant staying too long in situations that weren't healthy. Sometimes it meant caring more than I needed to. But every single experience gave me information. And over time, that information becomes awareness. And awareness allows you to choose differently. Belonging is human. I believe that we all start there. But as we grow, we get to redefine what belonging actually means for us. Not what we learned as children, not what earns approval, but what genuinely fits who we are now. So here's something to sit with this week. Where in your life are you still trying to earn belonging? And where might it simply be a matter of choosing environments that recognize who you already are? Because, okay, the truth is you don't actually have to belong everywhere, just in the places where you can be fully yourself. I'll see you in the next episode.